if you take like a 400-pound silverback gorilla.
Right, the absolute apex of, raw primal strength.
Exactly. A primate that represents terrestrial power in its purest form.
Mm-hmm.
And if you examine its anatomy, you're going to find something that completely shatters human assumptions about masculinity.
It really does.
Because that massive dominant animal, an animal capable of bending steel bars, has an erect penis that is roughly, what, 1¼ inches long?
Yeah, about 1¼ It's a biological reality that usually just leaves people entirely speechless when they first hear it.
I mean, it's wild.
Yeah.
Welcome to today's deep dive, everyone. We are looking at a massive, and I mean massive, stack of sources you sent us.
And if we look at human beings, in contrast to that gorilla, we are physically weaker. We completely lack that extreme sexual dimorphism. And
Yet humans possess the largest penis of any primate on Earth.
both in absolute size and in relative proportion to our body mass.
Which is just a crazy biological anomaly to kick things off with. So you've handed us urological meta-analyses, evolutionary biology papers, clinical trial data on mechanical tissue stretching devices.
Some truly eye-opening clinical data in there.
Yeah, and some incredibly candid psychological interviews, too. So our mission today is to take a topic that usually makes people either giggle uncomfortably or, defensively exaggerate and just strip it down to the absolute biological and psychological studs.
Right. We are viewing this strictly through the lens of data and cellular biology because the sources you provided, they reveal a staggering, almost tragic disconnect.
A disconnect between what we think is normal and what actually is.
Exactly. What the average male believes is normal, what the media portrays as a baseline, and what the clinical data actually proves. I mean, the male organ has really ceased to be just a functional biological appendage.
It's become a symbol.
It's been transformed into this crushing cultural measuring stick for human worth.
It really has.
Yeah.
And it is incredibly rare to get to the bottom of a topic that's so clouded by ego, late-night internet panic, and locker room mythology. So, okay, let's unpack this.
Let's do it.
Before we even look at the multi-million-dollar industry dedicated to, making things bigger, we have to establish the baseline. We need to look at the psychological toll of this cultural distortion. Because the numbers in that 52,000-person survey you provided are just bleak.
The psychological burden is severe. In that massive survey of heterosexual men and women, 45% of men explicitly stated they want to be bigger.
45%. I just let that sink in for a second.
Right. Nearly half the male population is walking around desiring a physical structural alteration to their baseline anatomy. And it goes further. 68% report having active, intrusive concerns about their size.
Wow.
And 55% are flat out unhappy with it.
More than half of all men are unhappy with a body part that is, statistically speaking, functioning exactly as evolution intended. I mean, I have to point the finger at media consumption here.
Oh, absolutely.
And I don't just mean internet porn, though obviously that's the main culprit. It's like the entire visual culture we live in.
Well, the clinical data certainly supports blaming the media. The studies note that while consuming adult media doesn't directly cause physical dissatisfaction in a vacuum.
Right. It's not like you watch a video and suddenly shrink.
Exactly. But it fundamentally warps a man's cognitive baseline. It completely alters his internal schema of what partners prefer and what a standard male body is supposed to look like.
I equate it to someone judging their own, pickup basketball skills by only ever watching the NBA All-Star game.
That's a great analogy.
You watch these 7-foot genetic anomalies dunking from the free throw line, and then you go to the local park and think, wow, I am fundamentally broken.
Yeah.
Because in the adult film industry, actors are cast specifically for being extreme statistical outliers.
They are. And the data from Eurochannel dismantles that industry's mythology beautifully. I mean, there's been this pervasive cultural myth often tied to historical figures like John Holmes.
The famous 10 to 12-inch myth.
Right, that double digits are the gold standard of virility. But the researchers conducted a highly cited meta-analysis of 15,521 men from across the globe measured in clinical settings.
Okay, 15,000 guys.
Over 15,000 men, and not a single one possessed a 10-inch penis.
Not a single one.
Zero.
Wait, really? Out of 15,000 men?
Out of 15,521. That measurement is such an extreme statistical outlier that it is practically a biological unicorn.
That is wild.
The idea that double-digit measurements are just floating around as a standard for you to aspire to is complete fiction.
I really want to dig into that 15,000-man study because if we are throwing out the 10-inch myth, we definitely need to address the locker room claim.
The classic locker room exaggeration.
Exactly. If you ask a random guy at the gym, the supposed average is always magically somewhere around 7 or 8 inches.
Although self-reported data in urology is entirely useless. Men lie.
Big surprise there.
Right. They measure incorrectly, they round up, or they literally start the tape measure somewhere near their belly button. But when trained medical professionals take the measurements in a controlled environment, those fabricated numbers just collapse.
And what are the real numbers?
Across those 15,521 men globally, the average erect length is exactly 5.2 inches.
5.2 inches.
That is 13.12 centimeters.
I guarantee there are people listening right now who are either completely shocked or just profoundly relieved by that number.
It's the biological reality.
And what about girth? Because that's the other half of the equation.
The average erect girth, so the circumference, is 4.6 inches, or about 11.66 centimeters. And in the flaccid state, the average length drops to about 3.5 inches.
I actually read through the methodology of that study, and one thing stood out that I think is crucial for anyone listening who might have preconceived notions about, regional or racial stereotypes. This wasn't just a survey of one demographic, right?
Yeah.
Not at all. The cohort diversity was vast. They analyzed data from 20 different global populations, spanning Europe, Africa, Asia, and the Americas.
And the results were the same.
The findings were remarkably consistent. The biological reality actively dispels the racial and geographic stereotypes that just permeate our culture. There is simply no biological basis for the idea that certain regions drastically drag down or inflate the global average.
There's a universal human baseline.
Yes, we are looking at a baseline human biological standard.
Let's talk about the bell curve for a second, because understanding standard deviation is like the only way to cure the statistical illiteracy. Average isn't just a lonely dot on a graph.
No, it's a cluster. In a normal distribution bell curve for human penis size, 68% of all men fall within a very tight central cluster.
And what's the range of that cluster?
It ranges from 4.5 inches to 5.8 inches erect. So if you're listening to this and you fall within that range, you are in the dead center of human biology.
Meaning the guy at the gym claiming to be a solid 8 inches is either lying or...
Or he's a statistical anomaly who should be studied.
Right. So what are the actual medical definitions of the extremes then, if someone is truly an outlier?
To give you the clinical definitions, a true clinical micropenis is defined as an erect length of under 3 inches, or roughly 7.5 centimeters.
Okay.
That is 2.5 standard deviations below the mean, and it affects only about 1 in 10,000 men. It is typically the result of hormonal abnormalities like insufficient testosterone or pituitary issues during fetal development.
And the other end of the spectrum.
On the other end, a macropenis is generally classified as anything over 9.5 inches. Both of these are massive biological rarities.
But the methodology of how these doctors arrived at that 5.2-inch average is fascinating to me, because it explains why so many guys think they are measuring correctly at home, but are actually inflating their numbers.
The bone-pressed method.
Yes. The urological sources mandate this bone-pressed method. If I'm understanding this correctly, you can't just rest a tape measure on the skin of your stomach and call it a day.
You cannot, because the visible skin of the abdomen is highly variable depending on body fat percentage. If you measure from the skin surface, you are essentially measuring a tree starting from the top of the grass rather than digging down to the root.
That makes a lot of sense.
To get a true clinical measurement, whether you are measuring flaccid stretched length or erect length, you must take a rigid ruler, place it at the dorsal root where the shaft meets the body, and physically compress the suprapubic fat pad until the ruler hits the pubic bone.
So you index from the skeleton, not the skin.
Exactly. You measure from the bone.
That distinction is huge. Because of that suprapubic fat pad, that layer of adipose tissue in the lower abdomen, a guy carrying, say, an extra 20 pounds might measure himself from the skin and think he's 4.5 inches.
Right.
But bone pressed, he's actually the global average of 5.2. The length is there, just buried under the fat.
Dr. Peter Stahl discusses this exact phenomenon in the sources under the clinical term buried penis syndrome. In extreme cases, the accumulation of suprapubic adipose tissue can literally swallow the base of the penis.
Oh, wow. So it looks completely different visually.
Right. The shaft is structurally intact and attached to the pubic bone, but visually it's obscured by the tissue.
Which means the first line of treatment for a guy who thinks he needs Like, penile enlargement surgery shouldn't be a scalpel near his genitals.
No, absolutely not.
It should be systemic weight loss,
Hmm.
or, if necessary, localized liposuction to reveal the anatomy that already exists.
Furthermore, the visible length of the penis is highly dynamic due to a very specific anatomical feature. We have to discuss the dartos muscle.
Yes, I love this part. The fact that shrinkage has a dedicated muscular mechanism is incredible. It's not just some passive deflation, it's an active biological response.
It's completely
I
active.
was reading about the dartos fascia, and it operates almost like a biological thermostat, right?
A thermostat is a perfect analogy, but it's a thermostat wired directly into your body's panic button.
Oh, man.
The dartos muscle is a layer of smooth muscle tissue located just beneath the skin of the scrotum and the penis. Its primary evolutionary function is thermoregulation for spermatogenesis.
Because the body needs to keep things at a specific temperature.
Exactly. The testes need to be slightly cooler than core body temperature to produce viable sperm. When the environment is cold, the dartos muscle actively contracts, pulling the anatomy tight against the body to conserve heat.
Standard cold water pool scenario.
Right. And when it's warm, it relaxes to allow for cooling. But it's not just reacting to temperature. It is tied directly to the sympathetic nervous system.
Which is the network responsible for your fight or flight response.
Yes. When you experience stress, anxiety, or a sudden rush of adrenaline, your body prioritizes survival. It routes blood flow away from the extremities and toward the vital organs and major muscle groups.
Because you need to run from a lion, not reproduce.
Exactly. And simultaneously, it triggers the dartos muscle to forcefully contract.
So imagine the cruel irony here. Let's say a man is deeply insecure about his size, and he's about to be intimate with a new partner. His heart rate spikes, he's anxious,
His sympathetic nervous system triggers a fight or flight response.
and his dartos muscle actively contracts, shrinking his flaccid penis to its absolute minimum visible size. It is literally a self-fulfilling biological prophecy of anxiety.
It's a vicious cycle. And it leads us to a psychological diagnosis that the medical community takes very, very seriously. Penile dysmorphic disorder, or PDD.
Is PDD categorized similarly to anorexia or other body dysmorphias?
It is. It's a specific subtype of body dysmorphic disorder recognized in psychiatric literature. According to DSM-5 criteria, a patient with PDD exhibits a pathological obsessive preoccupation with the perceived smallness of their penis.
So it's not just like a fleeting insecurity on a bad day.
No, this causes clinically significant distress or impairment in social, occupational, or other important areas of functioning. A man with PDD might avoid dating entirely, refuse to use public restrooms, or spend hours a day researching extreme, dangerous surgeries.
Even if a doctor tells him he's perfectly normal.
Even despite a urologist repeatedly confirming his anatomy is dead center on the bell curve.
Here's where it gets really interesting for me. If the global standard is 5.2 inches, and that size is perfectly capable of reproduction and, basic biological function, why did human anatomy evolve to look the way it does?
That is the evolutionary puzzle.
Because if we go back to that 400-pound silverback gorilla with a 1.25-inch anatomy, why did early hominids diverge so drastically from that baseline?
To understand the human anomaly,
But early human ancestors weren't living in harems.
No, the fossil and genetic evidence suggests our ancestors engaged in multi-male, multi-female mating systems. They were highly promiscuous.
So it's basically a free-for-all.
Biologically speaking, yes. If a female mates with multiple males within a short, fertile window, whose genes actually result in conception, that question drove the evolution of the human penis, leading to what we call the semen displacement theory.
This theory completely changes how you view human anatomy. Walk us through the physical mechanics of this, because it's not just about delivering DNA, it's essentially about excavation.
It is. The theory, which is heavily supported by evolutionary psychologists and anatomical researchers, focuses on the unique shape of the human glands and the coronal ridge.
That's the distinct flare at the head of the penis.
Right, exactly. Unlike other primates, the human penis is shaped somewhat like a plunger,
A plunger.
a biological plunger. During intercourse, the depth of the thrust and the specific structural flare of the coronal ridge create a vacuum effect.
So if a rival male had recently mated with the female, the longer, thicker penis of the next male acts as a physical displacement tool.
Exactly. As the penis is withdrawn during thrusting, the coronal ridge physically scoops out or displaces the semen of the previous mate.
Wow.
Evolutionary pressures overwhelmingly favored a longer, thicker appendage because the male capable of the deepest, longest-lasting thrusting was the one who could clear out rival genetics.
And ensure his own sperm remained closest to the cervix. That is, I mean, it's brilliant, but it's ruthless.
It's biological warfare.
But we can't ignore the other half of the evolutionary equation. It wasn't just male-to-male biological competition. Female ancestors played a massive role through sexual selection.
Sexual selection is an incredibly powerful evolutionary driver. Think of a female peacock choosing the male with the most elaborate, metabolically expensive tail feathers.
Right. The feathers signal good genetics.
Exactly. And before the invention of clothing, human genitals were entirely visible. Studies detailed in our sources suggest that female ancestors actively selected mates based on visual cues.
So flaccid penis size played a role in perceived attractiveness.
Right alongside shoulder width, jawline, and overall height, a larger flaccid appearance functioned as an honest signal of health, cardiovascular efficiency, and genetic robustness.
I read the ASAP Science study you're referring to, and it adds a crucial caveat. They showed women computer-generated 3D models of male body types with varying flaccid penis sizes to gauge attractiveness. And yeah, attractiveness ratings did increase as size increased initially,
But then they hit a wall.
a very sharp wall. Once the flaccid penis in the models exceeded about 7.6 centimeters, so roughly 3 inches, the attractiveness rating stopped climbing and actually began to diminish.
It drops off significantly.
But why would it drop off? If the biological mandate is bigger means healthier genetics, shouldn't massive equal perfect?
Because the human brain is exquisitely tuned to detect proportion. In biology, over-exaggerated traits often signal developmental instability or genetic mutation.
Like something has gone wrong in the coding.
Exactly. If a trait is pushed to an extreme, the subconscious biological brain flags it as a potential hazard, an inefficient use of metabolic resources, or an anomaly. Humans are fundamentally wired to desire proportion and symmetry, not endless, unchecked growth.
So biology strictly favors proportion. But our modern culture currently favors the extreme. Has it always been this way? Like, have humans always secretly worshipped the massive 10-inch ideal?
Not at all. If we look at the historical records, specifically ancient Greek culture, the ideal was the exact opposite.
The Better Men Lab source does a fantastic breakdown of this. You walk into the Louvre or, any museum with classical Greco-Roman antiquities, and you look at the marble statues of the great gods, the revered heroes, the philosophers, they are all depicted with very, very modest, flaccid anatomy.
And that wasn't because the marble was cold.
Right.
It was a deliberate philosophical choice. To the ancient Greeks, a smaller, taut penis was the ultimate symbol of civilized masculinity.
Really? Civilized masculinity.
Yes. They operated on a cultural philosophy that valued logic, wisdom, and self-restraint above all else. A man who could control his base, animalistic urges was viewed as a superior citizen of the polis. They associated smaller genital size with higher brain function and stoic discipline.
And they actively mocked the alternative.
Yeah.
If you look at who actually gets depicted with massive penises in Greek art, it's never the hero.
Never.
It's the barbarians, the satyrs, who were like half-beast and comic fertility gods like Priapus.
Priapus is the perfect example. He was cursed with a massive permanent erection, and he was largely treated as a joke or a symbol of raw, unthinking agrarian fertility. He was not a figure of respect.
Wow.
To the Greeks, exaggerated genitals were a caricature. A large penis meant you were a brute, a slave to passion, completely devoid of intellect.
So what does this all mean for you listening right now? We have a biological reality where the average is 5.2 inches. We have an evolutionary history that favored growth up to a very strict proportional limit. And we have a historical precedent where being small was literally a sign of supreme intelligence.
Yet today, men are agonizing, falling into severe dysmorphia over not being 8 inches long.
It proves that cultural programming can completely override biological reality.
It absolutely can. But to truly cure that dysmorphia, we need to take that modern cultural ideal, the massive porn star-sized endowment that 45% of men desire, and examine what happens when that ideal becomes a physical, waking reality.
Because the sources provide a remarkable case study of existence at the absolute furthest extreme right edge of the bell curve.
We have to talk about the interview with Matt Barr on the Dr. Tara podcast.
It is one of the most candid, eye-opening conversations about human anatomy I've ever read. Matt has a verified 14.5-inch erect penis, and his flaccid length is 10.5 inches.
Just to anchor that in the data we've discussed so far, his flaccid length is exactly double the global average erect length.
It is genuinely hard to even wrap my head around the physics of that. You listen to this interview and you realize almost instantly that what society views as the ultimate biological jackpot is, in day-to-day reality, a relentless logistical nightmare.
The wardrobe challenges alone dictate his life.
Just getting dressed in the morning requires engineering.
It does. When asked how he manages basic public existence, Matt explains that he essentially has to utilize techniques common in drag culture just to walk down the street.
Wow.
He has to take his anatomy and actively tuck it all the way back between his legs, pointing backward toward his gluteal cleft just to fit into standard trousers without it being visually disruptive.
He explicitly states he can never, ever wear sweatpants in public. If an average guy wears sweatpants, maybe there's a slight drape. If Matt wears them, the sheer volume of tissue makes it look like he is permanently fully aroused.
And this creates a constant, low-level social hazard for him. He notes the double standard regarding extreme anatomy.
What do you mean by that?
Well, a woman with a very large chest might face severe objectification, but her anatomy isn't inherently viewed by society as a sexual act in progress. However, if a man is walking through a grocery store appearing fully aroused, the public instantly perceives him as a threat, a creep, or an active danger.
Oh man, so he has to be hyper-vigilant about how his body is perceived at all times.
Exactly. He relies entirely on custom underwear. He shouts out brands like Big D Panties and Wild Mante because standard off-the-rack boxer briefs physically lack the pouch capacity to comfortably house a 10.5-inch flaccid appendage.
And exercise. He says public sports are entirely off the table. Running, jumping, playing basketball is a physical hazard.
The friction, the sheer weight, and the pendulum effect are painful.
Right, he works out exclusively in a private home gym to avoid the physical discomfort and the inevitable staring.
And that is just the baseline of existing in public. The logistical friction compounds exponentially when we discuss intimacy.
Which is the exact arena where society assumes he is thriving.
Right. Let's look at the basic hemodynamics of his anatomy. Achieving an erection requires a massive reallocation of blood flow.
The corpus cavernosum, the two sponge-like cylinders inside the penis, have to engorge and trap blood.
Right. And for Matt, the sheer volume of blood required to fill a 14.5-inch cylinder is staggering. It alters his cardiovascular demands.
That's crazy.
Matt notes that it takes a significant amount of time, patience, and highly dedicated foreplay just to draw enough blood into the tissue to achieve rigidity. The concept of a spontaneous quickie is biologically impossible for him.
He says intimacy has to be meticulously scheduled. It's a Saturday night event that requires the whole evening and the next morning to recover. And the physical act of penetrative sex requires extreme, almost clinical caution.
The risk of internal trauma to his partner is very real. He notes that he can only ever penetrate about halfway, perhaps slightly more, depending on the partner's anatomy.
Because the average vaginal canal is only 3 to 4 inches unaroused, expanding to 5 to 7 inches during arousal.
Exactly. If Matt were to thrust fully, the collision with the cervix could cause severe pain, bruising, or potentially hospitalizing internal tearing. He details needing immense amounts of specialized lubrication, profound and constant verbal communication, and very slow, deliberate movements.
Even oral sex is physically underwhelming for him. He admits to Dr. Tara that he largely doesn't enjoy receiving oral sex, which, of course, absolutely blew her mind.
It comes down to anatomical, incompatible mechanics. The human oral cavity and throat can only accommodate a few inches safely.
Right.
For Matt, only the top third of his anatomy can be stimulated. The base and the midshaft areas, rich in nerve endings, receive no stimulation, making the act physically frustrating rather than pleasurable.
And try buying condoms. You
Yeah.
can't just walk into a pharmacy. A standard Magnum condom would be like trying to stretch a thimble over a thumb. It would act as a tourniquet.
He has to rely on custom manufacturers. He specifically praises a brand called My Own, which utilizes precise algorithms to offer 52 different custom sizes based on exact length and girth measurements, shipped discreetly.
But beyond the physical friction of daily life, we really have to examine the psychological isolation of being that much of an outlier. The objectification he faces is intense.
Like relentless.
He talks about his social media inbox being flooded with weird DMs, predominantly from other men, offering to fly him out to private islands or luxury homes. He is treated as a fetish object.
He deals constantly with size queens, individuals who are solely interested in him as an anatomical curiosity. He notes how incredibly difficult it is to build genuine romantic trust.
Because he is constantly questioning whether a partner loves him for his mind, his humor, and his character, or if they are just obsessed with his physical dimensions.
Exactly. And looping back to the ancient Greeks, society assumes he must be stupid.
Really?
Yeah, people meet a guy with a 14-inch penis and, fueled by porn stereotypes, assume he is a dumb, hormone-driven brute. They treat him like a caricature. They even cast his anatomy for the Icelandic Phallological Museum.
So he is literally a walking museum exhibit.
The irony is profound. The exact physical trait that 45% of the male population desperately craves, the trait that fuels an entire underground medical industry, is the same trait that complicates Matt's ability to walk, ruins spontaneity in a sex life, and makes it immensely difficult for him to be viewed as a complex, three-dimensional human being.
It is the ultimate biological, be careful what you wish for.
It really is.
But despite hearing how difficult life is at the absolute extreme, the reality is that the enhancement industry is a multi-million-dollar juggernaut. Men are spending thousands of dollars and subjecting themselves to what looks like medieval torture to try and add just a few millimeters to their anatomy.
Let's look at the actual clinical efficacy and the cellular biology of these interventions. We can divide the enhancement landscape into two distinct categories: mechanical traction devices and medical interventions ranging from injections to surgical reconstruction.
Let's begin with the mechanics of traction. The Dr. Rena Malick's source provides an incredibly detailed review of these devices, and visually they look like scaffolding for your pelvis. How do these things actually alter human tissue?
The scientific principle underlying these devices is a biological process called mechanotransduction.
I want to pause on that word, mechanotransduction. What is happening at the cellular level?
Mechanotransduction is the process by which living cells translate mechanical stimuli, in this case, prolonged physical tension and stretching, into biochemical signals.
Okay, so tension signals the cells.
Yes. When you apply constant tension to the tunica albuginea, which is the tough, fibrous sheath surrounding the erectile sponge tissue, you create microscopic tears in the collagen matrix.
Oh, similar to how lifting weights creates micro tears in muscle fibers.
Exactly. But here we are dealing with connective tissue. When these micro tears occur, the body initiates a healing cascade. It sends fibroblasts to the site, which synthesize new collagen and elastin fibers, gradually remodeling and expanding the tissue envelope.
So it actually grows.
It is the exact same biological principle used by orthodontists when braces stretch the periodontal ligament to move teeth, or in Ilizarov bone lengthening surgeries where a fractured bone is slowly pulled apart to grow new bone in the gap.
It's important to note that these devices weren't originally invented so guys could hit 6 inches, right? They were developed for a very specific medical pathology.
They were pioneered for the treatment of Peyronie's disease. Peyronie's occurs when a man develops tough, localized plaques of scar tissue inside the tunica albuginea. This scar tissue doesn't stretch when the penis engorges with blood, causing severe, often painful curvature during an erection.
Ouch.
Urologists realized that applying consistent, gentle countertension could break down that tough scar plaque and encourage the growth of healthier, more flexible tissue, thereby straightening the anatomy.
But inevitably, men without Peyronie's realized, wait, if this forces the body to grow new tissue, maybe it can make me longer. And clinical trials suggest it actually can, but the time commitment is absurd.
It is immense.
Dr. Malick reviews 3 specific devices with real scientific backing. Let's walk through the gauntlet here. First is the andropenis gold.
The andropenis gold relies on a plastic base ring resting against the pubis, dual dynamic metal extension rods, and a silicone band that loops over the glands, the head, to lock the anatomy in place.
Yikes.
You attach it, dial up the tension on the rods, and the tissue is suspended under constant stretch.
And to see any cellular remodeling, how long do you have to wear this metal cage?
The clinical protocol demands 4 to 9 hours of daily wear consistently for 6 to 9 months.
4 to 9 hours a day for the better part of a year. I just can't fathom the compliance issues. You were sitting at your desk, going to the grocery store, trying to live your life with spring-loaded rods strapped to your pelvis.
The compliance drop-off is huge.
And what is the actual payoff?
In a controlled study of 96 men who managed to comply, wearing the device for an average of 4.6 hours a day, the average gain in stretched flaccid length was 1.5 centimeters.
Wait, 1.5 centimeters.
That translates to roughly 0.6 inches.
Half an inch for sacrificing half a workday every day for 6 months. And it costs around $179. Let's look at the second option, the Penamaster Pro, because the andropenis gold sounds agonizing for the glands.
The Penamaster Pro attempts to mitigate the point contact pain of the silicone band by utilizing a specialized vacuum suction bulb.
Okay, a vacuum.
You apply a protective lubricating gel, Place the glands into a small anatomical chamber and compress the bulb to create a vacuum seal that securely holds the tissue without localized pinching. You then attach that vacuum chamber to either a rigid rod system or a flexible, wearable tension belt that straps down around the knee.
That sounds like you need an engineering degree just to put your pants on in the morning. Does the vacuum method yield better results?
In a study tracking 93 patients who used it for an average of 5.2 hours daily, the overall length increase averaged 1.8 centimeters.
A tiny bit more.
However, it is incredibly cumbersome. Retailing between $260 and $468, many users report profound frustration trying to maintain the vacuum seal throughout the day or finding the knee strap system impossible to conceal under modern clothing.
Okay, what about the third device? Because 5 hours a day is a compliance nightmare. No normal human being is pulling that off.
The third is the Restore X.
What's
This
that?
device is unique because it was developed directly by researchers at the Mayo Clinic, giving it a very robust foundation in neurological science.
Oh, nice.
It moves away from the vacuum and uses a specialized clamping mechanism to hold the glands. But its primary innovation is counter-traction technology. It is specifically hinged, allowing it to be bent at an angle to target the convex side of the penis affected by Peyronie's curvature.
And the time commitment, because that's the real barrier to entry for these guys.
Vastly superior. The protocol for the Restore X requires just two 30-minute sessions a day for a total of 12 weeks.
Oh, wow.
In their clinical trials, users average a 1.6 centimeter length increase.
An hour a day for 12 weeks to gain 1.6 centimeters? That is slightly closer to the realm of sanity, but it costs $525. And Dr. Malik notes that the clamping mechanism, while efficient, can be severely uncomfortable.
Discomfort is the limiting factor for all mechanotransduction, and this is where Dr. Malik outlines the most dangerous myth in the enhancement community, the idea that more tension equals faster results.
The no pain, no gain mentality applied to the absolute worst possible body part.
Precisely. Men grow impatient. They aggressively dial up the tension rods, attempting to rush a biological process.
And what happens?
The result is not faster cell growth. It is severe tissue bruising, blistering of the glands, and catastrophic nerve injury resulting in permanent numbness. Mechanotransduction operates on a strict biological timeline. Brute force simply destroys the tissue.
So strapping yourself into a traction device for hours a day isn't appealing. Men turn to the medical route. Let's talk about needles and knives.
The clinical options.
Right. The Dr. Durst source discusses a very recent study from the Journal of Sexual Medicine, published in February 2024, regarding the PRP P-shot. I understand PRP is huge in orthopedics for joint repair, but how is it being applied here?
PRP stands for platelet-rich plasma. The mechanism of action is fascinating. A clinician draws the patient's own blood and places it in a centrifuge, spinning it at high speeds to separate the red blood cells from the plasma, isolating a concentrated serum of platelets and growth factors.
And then they inject that directly into the erectile tissue.
Yes. Using precise ultrasound guidance, they inject the PRP directly into the corpus cavernosum. Because the substance is autologous, meaning derived entirely from your own body, the safety profile is phenomenal.
So there's no risk of rejection.
Virtually none. No allergic reaction. The growth factors stimulate angiogenesis, which is the creation of new blood vessels, and promote tissue regeneration.
And what did that February 2024 study actually find?
In a cohort of healthy men aged 20 to 55, a single round of PRP injections yielded an average length increase of 0.8 inches and a girth increase of 0.47 inches. Furthermore, participants reported significantly improved erectile rigidity and function.
Almost an inch in length and half an inch in girth with no daily metal cages and zero downtime. It sounds like the holy grail of enhancement.
It is highly promising, but we must view it with scientific caution. The study cohort was relatively small, and because the procedure is so new, we lack decades of longitudinal data to confirm if those structural changes are permanent or if the tissue eventually reverts without continuous, expensive follow-up treatments.
What about fillers? We see hyaluronic acid used constantly in facial aesthetics to plump lips and cheeks. Is that being transferred to urology?
Hyaluronic acid, or HA fillers, are becoming increasingly standard for girth enhancement. HA is a naturally occurring substance in the human body, so it's safe. It is injected into the dartos fascia layer beneath the skin to add volume, typically increasing girth by 2 to 3 centimeters.
But doesn't the body break that down eventually?
Yes, the body naturally metabolizes HA, meaning the results safely dissolve after 12 to 18 months. The extreme, life-altering danger lies in men seeking a cheap, permanent fix through non-absorbable fillers.
We have to talk about PMMA and silicone. Why are urologists begging men to stop injecting this stuff?
Because the biological reaction is devastating. PMMA, polymethyl methacrylate, is essentially an acrylic glass polymer often used in bone cement. Industrial liquid silicone is similarly foreign.
Wait, bone cement.
Yes. When unlicensed clinics or desperate individuals inject these non-absorbable synthetic compounds into the highly vascular tissue of the penis, the body's immune system recognizes a massive foreign invader.
It initiates an immune cascade.
A catastrophic one. Macrophages, the white blood cells responsible for engulfing cellular debris, rush to the site. But they cannot break down acrylic polymers or industrial silicone.
So what happens to the tissue?
The immune system panics, fusing cells together into foreign body giant cells, which then form hard, disfiguring granulomatous nodules of inflamed tissue around the filler. The result is severe chronic inflammation, agonizing disfigurement, tissue necrosis, where the tissue literally dies and rots, and the permanent destruction of erectile function.
Good Lord, you are risking literal gangrene of your anatomy to look thicker in sweatpants.
It's a horrific risk.
And what about actual surgery? The scalpel. I hear about guys getting lengthening surgery. What are the surgeons actually doing?
The surgical reality is bleak, and ethical urologists rarely recommend it for cosmetic purposes. The standard lengthening procedure is the surgical release of the suspensory ligament.
Explain the anatomy of that ligament. Where is it?
The suspensory ligament is a strong band of fibrous tissue that anchors the base of the penis deep against the pubic symphysis. It provides the upward structural angle and stability during an erection.
So the surgeon just severs that anchor.
Exactly. They cut the ligament, which allows the internal portion of the penis to drop downward and forward out of the body cavity. This visually reveals an additional 2 to 2.5 centimeters of flaccid length.
But, and this is the crucial question, does it increase the erect length?
It does not increase erect length by a single millimeter.
Not a millimeter.
The actual sponge tissue is not altered. Worse, because you have severed the critical stabilizing anchor, an erect penis post-surgery loses its upward trajectory. It often points straight down or wobbles uncontrollably, creating severe biomechanical instability during penetrative intercourse.
You gain an inch in the locker room, but you functionally destroy your ability to have stable intercourse.
If we connect this intense medical gauntlet to the bigger picture, it is deeply unsettling. The fact that men are willing to endure 6 hours a day in traction cages, inject industrial acrylics that cause necrosis, or surgically sever their foundational ligaments just to gain 1.5 centimeters of flaccid length.
It highlights the absolute stranglehold this dysmorphia has on the male psyche.
It is a profound, tragic desperation.
And the true irony of that desperation brings us to the final and perhaps most important section of our deep dive. Men are spending thousands of dollars, risking nerve damage and amputation, all presumably to impress their partners.
Right.
But what does the audience for this anatomy actually think? Does size dictate their satisfaction?
The satisfaction disconnect between men and their partners is the most glaring, illuminating statistic in all the literature we've reviewed. We established earlier that 55% of men are unhappy with their size. However, when female partners were surveyed in massive blinded studies, 85% reported being completely wholly satisfied with their partner's size.
85%. Let's just sit with that. The vast, overwhelming majority of women are perfectly happy with exactly what they have.
Furthermore, only 5 to 10% of women surveyed stated that penis size was a very important factor in choosing a romantic partner.
So millions of men are agonizing, self-mutilating, and spiraling into depression over a metric that 90% of women do not even rank as a top priority. Why is there such a massive cognitive disconnect?
I think we have to look at the neuroanatomy of pleasure.
We do.
Here's where it gets really interesting. A lot of men operate under this porn-fueled assumption that the vaginal canal is like an endless cavern that requires a 9-inch tool to fully stimulate the nerve endings.
That assumption is fundamentally detached from human neuroanatomy. The highest concentration of sensory nerve endings in the vaginal canal is located almost exclusively in the outer third.
Just the outer third. Yes. The inner 2/3 possess very sparse sensory innervation. Even the highly coveted, extensively debated G-spot, the Grafenberg spot, is situated on the anterior wall of the vagina, only about 1/3 of the way in.
Meaning you absolutely do not need 8 inches of length to reach the most sensitive areas. A mathematically average 5.2-inch penis is more than biologically capable, with room to spare of reaching and fully stimulating the neuroanatomy of a partner.
Exactly. Now, to be rigorous with the data, one study referenced in the ASAP Science source did suggest nuance. Some women reported experiencing more frequent vaginal orgasms with longer penises. The researchers theorized that extreme length allows for simultaneous stimulation of the entire vaginal canal and the cervix, creating a compounded sensory experience for some.
But the sources also make a massive, scientifically crucial distinction about female orgasms, right? Vaginal versus clitoral.
An absolutely critical distinction. The scientific and anatomical consensus increasingly demonstrates that vaginal orgasms and clitoral orgasms are largely separate physiological phenomena.
Oh, so?
They utilize entirely different nerve pathways. Vaginal stimulation travels primarily via the pelvic nerve, while clitoral stimulation travels via the pudendal nerve. Functional MRI studies show they activate completely different regions of the sensory cortex in the brain.
And developmentally, the clitoris and the glands of the penis are homologous organs, right? They develop from the exact same embryonic tissue.
They do. They possess comparable densities of nerve endings. The vast majority of women require direct, targeted clitoral stimulation to achieve orgasm. This stimulation has absolutely nothing to do with the depth of vaginal penetration or the length of the male organ.
Massive length is simply not a biological prerequisite.
Or even a primary driver of female sexual pleasure.
So if a massive 10-inch penis isn't the magical key to a partner's satisfaction, what is? When researchers ask women what actually dictates sexual success, what are the metrics?
The clinical sources and psychological interviews are unanimous. The most reliable predictors of sexual satisfaction are emotional connection, confidence, an enjoyable personality, overall cardiovascular fitness, and technique.
Technique over size.
Specifically, a willing dedication to extensive foreplay and the ability to maintain open, unashamed communication in the bedroom.
It's almost tragic. Men are taking their own competitive, highly visual insecurities and projecting them entirely onto their partners. Men judge each other in the locker room based on visual size.
They do.
Men judge themselves against adult film stars based on visual size, so they naturally assume women are holding up that exact same visual measuring stick. But the reality is, women are evaluating the entire tactile, emotional, and physical experience and the entire complex human being attached to the organ.
The anxiety men feel is a closed, self-generated feedback loop. It is fueled by flawed self-reporting, unrealistic digital media, and a complete misunderstanding of female neuroanatomy.
So, to synthesize this massive, incredible journey we've been on today, the clinical global average is 5.2 inches, and it is a marvel of evolutionary engineering perfectly suited for its function. The media you consume is actively lying to you about what is normal. Our evolutionary history favored proportion and punished developmental extremes. Living as a statistical giant like Matt Barr is logistically difficult, physically uncomfortable, and socially isolating.
And the medical enhancement industry requires either agonizing daily dedication to traction devices, or it carries catastrophic physical risks like necrosis and ligament instability for incredibly minimal gains.
It is a profound reality check, wrapped in hard cellular biology and evolutionary history.
Yeah, it really is.
To you, the listener, who provided this stack of sources, true sexual wellness does not start in a surgical suite or with a traction device. It starts with the difficult work of dismantling the psychological burden of a distorted body image. The clinical data, the evolutionary history, and the partner satisfaction surveys we've covered today should be immensely, profoundly comforting.
They really should be.
But we also acknowledge that shaking off decades of relentless cultural programming and locker room mythology is hard work. You have to actively choose every single day to trust the science over the insecurity.
And this raises an important, slightly terrifying question as we look to the horizon. We spent this entire deep dive deconstructing physical, biological reality versus media perception. But as human interaction moves increasingly into digital spaces, into virtual reality, the metaverse, and heavily edited online avatars, will our physical, biological constraints eventually matter less?
Oh, wow.
Or will the ability to digitally and infinitely enhance our virtual avatars simply become the new invisible frontier of male body dysmorphia? When physics no longer limits size, where does the mind stop?
Oh, man. If guys are experiencing clinical dysmorphia and stress over 5.2 inches in the physical world, we totally have to compete with a custom-coded, mathematically impossible 15-inch avatar in virtual reality. The psychological toll of that limitless digital frontier is a wild, terrifying thought to end on. Thank you for providing the sources and joining us on this incredibly revealing journey. Keep questioning the myths, keep trusting the hard data, and we'll see you on the next deep dive.